All right. Lecture 18. Quadratic equations.
Hey, I thought maybe you had a class over.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, sorry.
That's
I'm
fine.
up here now. We'll both do that and come back.
Okay. All right. Quadratic equations. And part one, this is going to be on simple trinomials. Okay. So with quadratic equations, there is so much to talk about, and it's a pretty big topic once you get to algebra 2, because you've been spending all this time in algebra 1 and in the beginning part of algebra 2 just learning how to factor. So all that information is going to be used when we start doing quadratic equations. So let's start off with a definition real quick. What is a quadratic equation and why are they so important? All right, definition. Quadratic equation. Okay, a quadratic equation is an equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, comma, where a, b, and c are real numbers. So a, b, and c are real numbers, and a is not equal to 0. Okay? So let's talk about the format of it real quick. So a quadratic equation is always going to be of this form. It's always going to be ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It might be written a little bit differently once you get to the actual problems, but every single quadratic equation can be written in this form. So let me go ahead and do a fact. The highest exponent of a quadratic equation is always 2. So the highest exponent of any quadratic equation is always going to be 2. And you can see it right here. The highest exponent is always going to be 2. It's never going to go further than that. If the highest exponent was not 2, like let's say, for example, the highest exponent was 3 instead, then if the exponent is 3, then that's not quadratic anymore. You're dealing with a cubic equation at that point. And we're not going to be discussing those in this course. But quadratic equations, the highest exponent is always going to be 2. X is going to be the variable. And the A, the B, and the C, those are all just going to be numbers. And for this lecture in particular, they're always going to be whole numbers. So you might see positive whole numbers for A, B, and C, and you might see negative whole numbers for A, B, and C. But A, B, and C are really just real numbers, and that's all that it's going to be. Okay? So let's go ahead and get on to some examples of what they look like, how to solve them, and stuff like that. So the first example I wanted to do was x squared plus 7x plus 12 equals 0. Okay, so right away, you can see that the highest exponent in this question is going to be 2. So that's going to make it a quadratic equation because that highest exponent is always going to be 2. Okay? And you have real numbers out in front of the variables. Remember we talked about A, B, and C. Those are just real numbers. Well, here, C is going to be 12. C is that last number on the right side. So C is 12. B is going to be what? B is going to be 7. That's that number in the middle. And then A, we call that the leading coefficient because that's in front. The leading coefficient for this is not there right now, so we assume it to be 1. So A is equal to 1 in this case. So what we're going to do for these is we're going to see if we can multiply to the last number and then add up to the middle number. So we're basically looking for two numbers that will multiply to 12. So I'm going to write an m above the 12, but I'm also going to write an a above the 7 because we're trying to add up to 7 at the same time. So what two numbers will multiply to 12, but at the same time add up to 7? Well, it's going to be 4 and 3, right? 4 and 3. And both of these numbers are positive, by the way, because you got to multiply to a positive number, but you've also got to add up to a positive number. So I know that 4 and 3 are my two numbers that I'm going to use. Okay? So once you've found those two numbers, you can factor it just like we did the first week of school. You can write this down as x plus 4 and x plus 3. Both of those factors are in parentheses. So now we factored it. So I'm going to write factor over here because that's always the first step when you're trying to solve these things. You're trying to factor it first. And I end up with two different factors. My first factor is going to be x plus 4, and my second factor is going to be x plus 3. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to set both of those factors equal to 0, and we're going to find out what x has to be. So I'm going to take the first factor, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. I get x plus 4 is 0. And then I take the second factor and I set that equal to 0. I get x plus 3 equals 0. So now I've got two different equations that I can solve for x with. So let's go ahead and do them both. So this x plus 4 right here, to get the x by itself, I've got to get rid of this plus 4. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. That way I can get rid of this plus 4. And I always make sure I do it on both sides of the equal sign. So that way, when you get to the end of this, both sides are still equal because you're doing the same thing on both sides of the equal sign, right? So the x is going to come down first. The plus 4 and the minus 4 are going to cancel each other out, so I don't have to worry about those. And then on the right side, I have an equal sign, and I have 0 minus 4. And we know that 0 minus 4 is going to give us negative 4. So that's going to be the first answer. And then I look at the next equation and I see what answer that one gives me. This time I have to subtract 3 from both sides. So I do that. I get x equals negative 3. So now I know what my two answers are going to be. Negative 4 and negative 3. And then what I'm going to do is, just like we did for the absolute value equations, we're going to write down a solution set, which is basically just a set with those two numbers inside there. So I'm going to have a set containing negative 4 and negative 3, because those are the only two solutions for the equation up here. Okay, so we factor first. And then the next step is we solve equations. We solve equations. And then the last step is we write our two answers in a solution set. So this is called a solution set. Okay. Now, before I get to the next question, I want to show you how to check your answers so you know that you're doing them right. And basically when you want to check them is you want to plug them back in for x in the original equation. So let's go ahead and try that. The first one I want to do is I want to check x equals -4. X equals -4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy down the equation up there. X squared plus 7x plus 12 equals 0. So that's my original equation that they gave me. And then wherever I see an x, I'm just going to let x be -4 and see what happens. So it's very important that when you check your answers, you use as many parentheses as possible, because I've got a negative number right here. And the way I use my parentheses when I check it is going to affect how the answer is. So I'm going to let x be -4 inside parentheses, and I'm going to square that number. So once again, I'm just letting x be -4 and seeing what happens. Okay, plus 7. And where I see an x right here, I'm going to let that be -4. And then plus 12 equals 0. And we'll see if that works out. Okay, so what happens when I square a negative number? You get a -4 times -4, right? That's going to give you a positive 16. So I'm going to get a positive 16. Notice if I didn't have the parentheses, I would get -16, and that would mess up the checking. Okay. Plus, over here, I have 7 times -4. That's going to give me -28. Plus 12 equals 0. And when I add these two numbers up, I have 16 plus -28. That's going to give me -12. And then I have this plus 12 over here equals 0. So all I did was I added these two numbers next. And now I add these two numbers and I get 0 equals 0. That is a true statement. So I know that that answer is going to work out. Okay, so that's how you check your answers. And the next one we're going to do is we're going to check the -3 and see if that one works out. So now let's let x equal -3 and see what happens. So my original equation was x squared plus 7x plus 12 equals 0. And I replaced the x with a -3 everywhere I see an x. So I'm going to let this be a -3, square that, plus 7 times -3 plus 12 equals 0. Okay, so -3 squared, that's going to be positive 9, right? Positive 9. And then over here, I have a plus 7 times -3, that's -21, plus 12 equals 0. Okay. These first two numbers, when I add those up, I'm going to get -12 plus 12 equals 0. So then at the very end, I do get 0 equals 0. So I know that -3 is definitely going to be a solution to this equation right here. And I know that by checking it. Okay? Let's do another one just like that. Let's look at some of the questions from the problem set. Okay. Let's do number 3. Definitely not going to get to them all today, but I'll do the most important ones. So here I have x squared minus 3x minus 40 equals 0. And I first start off by seeing if I can factor it. So once again, I'm trying to find those two numbers that'll multiply to negative 40. They got to multiply to negative 40, but they also have to add up to a negative 3, right? So what two numbers will do that? Well, without thinking of the negatives first, let's just think of two numbers that'll multiply to 40. 10 and 4, right? But I'm not going to write those down because they're not going to add up to give me a negative 3. So the 10 and the 4 I can't use. Instead, I'm going to try some kind of 8 and some kind of 5. So that way it'll multiply to 40. At this point, I have to choose which one of these two numbers is going to be negative. And the way I know which one is negative is I look at the adding number. I'm trying to add up to a negative 3. And if I'm trying to add up to a negative 3, that means that the biggest number out of these two have to be negative. So I'm going to put the negative on the 8. Okay? You with me so far? So negative 8 plus 5, that's going to give me that negative 3 that I want when I add up. But then when I multiply the two numbers, what do I get? Negative 8 times positive 5, that's going to give me negative 40. So these are the exact two numbers that I need. So the way I'm going to factor this is x minus 8 and x plus 5 equals 0, of course. So now I've got my two factors and I'm ready to set up my two different equations. I'm going to have x minus 8 equals 0, just going off of that factor. And then the x plus 5, I set that equal to 0, and that's going to be my second equation. Okay? So now I can solve them both for x by doing what I need to do. To get rid of a negative 8, I've got to add 8 to both sides. That way, the negative 8 and the positive 8 will cancel out. So here I have x equals 0 plus 8. That's going to give me positive 8. So my first answer is going to be 8. What about my second answer? Well, I need to subtract 5 from both sides. That way I'll get rid of that plus 5. When I do that, I get x equals 0 minus 5. That's going to be negative 5. So that's going to be my second answer. So my solution set is going to be 8 and negative 5. And what you'll notice is these two numbers are the exact opposites of the first two numbers that I chose, right? I had to choose the two numbers that would factor this. Remember how I chose the negative 8 and the positive 5? Well, those are actually going to switch signs down here when they come inside the solution set. So keep that in mind too. Your solution sets are going to be opposites of the first two numbers that you chose. Okay? So how do I check this? Well, I'm going to let x be 8 and see what happens. And then after that, I'm going to let x be negative 5 and see what happens. So here, I'm just going to let x be 8. So I'm going to get 8 squared minus 3 times 8 minus 40 should hopefully give me 0 when it's all said and done, because that's the equation that, I started off with. Okay? So I'm just letting x be 8, and I'm seeing what happens. And hopefully I get a 0 equals 0 at the very end. That's how I know I got it right. So 8 squared, that's 8 times 8. That's going to give me 64, right? Minus 3 times 8, that's 24. Minus 40 equals 0. So now I take the first two numbers and I put those together, 64 minus 24 is going to give me a positive 40. So these two are going to give me a 40. I bring down my negative 40 that was over here. I should equal 0. And then 40 minus 40 is 0. So I know I got it right. Okay. Let's check the second answer. The second answer was negative 5. So x equals negative 5. What that means is everywhere I see an x in the original equation, I'm going to let that be a negative 5 and see what happens. Let me zoom out a little bit. So now I'm going to let the number inside the parentheses be negative 5. So I get negative 5 squared, right? I got to square that x up here, minus 3 times negative 5 minus 40 equals 0. So everything has stayed the same, except x has just been replaced by negative 5, because I'm trying to see if negative 5 will work. Negative 5 squared, that's going to be a positive 25. Negative 3 times negative 5, that's going to be positive 15, right? Because I got that negative number times a negative number. And then after that, I bring down the negative 4 equals 0. Okay. So 25 plus 15 is going to give me 40. So then 40 minus 40 equals 0. And yes, 40 minus 40 does equal 0. So I got it. Okay. For all these questions that you're going to be doing for homework, all of them are going to have two answers. There's always going to be two numbers inside the solution set. You're never going to have a situation where you have no solution or undefined for an answer. You're always just going to have two whole numbers for your answers. You will get to fractions eventually on Wednesday, and we do need to talk about how you get fractions. And the reason why you would get fractions anyway is because of the rainbow method. But we're not going to get to that until Wednesday. Okay? All right, let me do one more, and then I'll let you guys go. Let's see, which one do I want to do? I think I'm going to do number 8. No, on second thought, I think I'm going to do number 6. Yeah, I'll do 6. Okay. All right, so number 6 on the problem set. We have, let's see, x squared minus x minus 30 equals 0. Okay, so we know this is quadratic because the highest exponent is 2, right? So I need to start off by factoring. So what two numbers will multiply to a negative 30, but at the same time add up to a negative 1? Okay. So I'm trying to add up to a negative 1. That would mean that the two numbers that I would choose, they have to be kind of close together, right? So I'm going to choose 6 and 5. 6 and 5. I know that 6 times 5 will give me 30, but how can I add up to a negative 1? How can I add up to that negative 1 right there? The biggest number has to be negative then, right? So I'm going to put the negative on the 6. So that way, when I add them up, I do get that negative 1, but at the same time, if I multiply them, I'll still get that negative 30. So these are the two numbers that I'm going to choose. And if you flip the signs on them right now, you'll see that your solution set is going to be 6 and negative 5, because I can switch the signs on the two numbers to get the solution set, right? So the way I factor this is going to be x minus 6, x plus 5. And I'm just taking those two numbers that I found and I'm putting them inside parentheses with the x. So now I have two different equations. I got x minus 6 equals 0, and I got x plus 5 equals 0. And for both of these, I need to get x on the left side by itself. So for the first one, I'm going to add 6 to both sides. And I get x equals 0 plus 6 is 6. So see how that's the opposite of that negative 6? I get a positive 6 for my first answer. That's always going to happen. Up here, I got x plus 5 equals 0. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. That way, that'll get rid of that positive 5. And I get x equals 0 minus 5 is negative 5. So here's my solution set. Positive 6, negative 5. Okay, so now I'm ready to check my answers. I've got x equals 6. First off, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace every single x I see up here with a positive 6, and I'm going to see what happens. So I get 6 squared, just letting x be 6, minus 1 times 6, minus 30 equals 0. And technically, I don't need the 1 right here, but it's not going to make a difference once we get to our final answer. Okay? So the first thing I would do is I would square the 6 to get 36. 1 times 6 is just 6, right? So I get minus 6. And then I bring down the minus 30 equals 0. So now it's just a matter of subtracting. I know that 36 minus 6 is going to give me a positive 30. I've still got this minus 30 over here, so I have to bring that down. And everything is still equal to 0. And then 30 minus 30 is 0, indeed. So I know that 6 is going to be one of my answers, definitely. And then the last one I'm going to check is the negative 5. So let's do that next. X is equal to negative 5. So everywhere I see an x up here, I'm going to replace it with a negative 5 and see what happens. So we got that negative 5 squared minus 1 times negative 5 minus 30 should equal 0. So I'm just replacing x with the negative 5, and I'm seeing what happens. Negative 5 times negative 5 is going to give me positive 25, right? Because I got that negative times that negative. And then negative 1 times negative 5, that'll give me a positive 5, right? So these two are going to give me plus 5. And then I bring down the minus 30 equals 0. Okay. 25 plus 5, I know that that's 30. I bring down the negative 30, and then that's going to get me to that 0 equals 0 that I want.